Hello and welcome back to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. It is Sunday night, first day of summer, Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, whatever's left of it to all the dads out there. Mark and Mark, Daly and Hamilton here to recap what turned out to be completely opposite to what we predicted a couple of nights ago. Mark, welcome back. Happy Father's Day, happy summer. And we kind of got it wrong, didn't we, in terms of what we were expecting for action on the track. It was this should be one of these races that we're going to look back hopefully at the end of the year and say this was this was a great race. I think we said the same thing 2 weeks ago after Azerbaijan, but yeah, I'm still buzzing about this one. This was exciting to watch.
And you kind of ruined my open a little bit because I planned to come in here and state, just like we've been telling all of you for 3 weeks, the French Grand Prix was going to be fantastic. And as usual, we were right. But honestly, I think we downplayed this race weekend. And I think we did that maybe because we played up Monaco too much. And Monaco turned out to be such a disappointment. So being good business analysts, we were a little bit conservative with our predictions on what this weekend would look like in terms of racecraft and excitement and drama. And boy, were we off the mark. And honestly, we probably should have known after qualifying. Qualifying
Mm.
was fantastic. We put up a poll. Did you enjoy qualifying? And likewise, the race was fantastic. And unfortunately, because I didn't want to watch the race at 5 a.m., I watched it at about 10 a.m. But I got to sit outside in the beautiful sunset or in the sunshine, soak in the rays, watch it on my phone, and it was an absolute blast. And like you, I'm still buzzing now. And geez, I watched it 10 hours ago.
I know, right? Well, first of all, Mark, before we go into what happened on the track, let's very quickly just run down and set up everything in terms of the final race classification, the top 10, and then the drivers and the constructors championship. So, winning the race 1.5 laps before the end was Red Bull's Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton coming in second, 2.9 seconds behind. Sergio Perez, another strong result for him, rounding out the podium in the second Red Bull. Valtteri Bottas, full of naughty words today, came home P4 for Mercedes. Lando Norris and Danny Ricciardo coming home fifth and sixth for McLaren. A very strong showing for them. Pierre Gasly, Fernando Alonso, and Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll. I almost cut off poor Lance right at the end there, kind of rounding out to the top 10. Double points finish for Aston Martin, which I think they should be very pleased and happy about, especially Lance after having a very unfortunate qualifying when he got he had his time deleted and then just ran into a whole bunch of bad luck and then a red flag at the end, which really ruined his afternoon. So some interesting finishes in the top 10 there. Now this is where it gets extremely interesting, is going over to the drivers championship. The top five in the drivers at the moment: Max Verstappen 131 points, Lewis Hamilton falling behind a little bit now, 119. Sergio Perez into third position with 84 points. Lando Norris fourth with 76, and Valtteri Bottas in fifth position in the Drivers' Championship with 59. And then equally interesting when it comes to the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull extending their lead in the Constructors a little bit now, 215 for RBR, Mercedes 178, McLaren still in third place with 110, Ferrari, despite not a great weekend in France, 94, and then Alpha Tauri now fifth in the Constructors with 45. So, Mark, where do we want to go from here? There were so many great storylines, but I think what my takeaway from this one, this afternoon, was that Mercedes they got outthought, out strategized, and outraced on the track. I mean, that was a big risky move that Red Bull went with, deciding to go for that second tire stop. And boy, did they just pull that out by the skin of their teeth, and it made for a very, very exciting finish. But even before that, it was an interesting start. Max on pole, ahead of the two Mercedes, and then Sergio in P4. He had a decent start. I think he's sort of even on pace with Lewis, but going into that first corner, he just couldn't keep his car. It just didn't rotate through the corner. He couldn't. He just didn't have enough grip, and he had to go into the runoff area, and he dropped a position. But it got really interesting because they went with the undercut, and then just his pit stop was only about 2 or 3 tenths of a second faster than Lewis Hamilton, and that's all he needed to take the position back. But then that second risky pit stop stop. Wow, I think that'll be one of the calls we'll be talking about at the end of the year.
Absolutely. Earlier today, one of our good listeners, Vincenzo or Landino, posted a really kind of cool snapshot. And I sincerely apologize. I'm brutal with names. I apologize. But he posted a really cool graphic, and it was basically the race classification and the final positions for qualifying. And if you took it out of context and hadn't watched the race, you would have
Hmm.
assumed it was boring race. Max qualifies on pole. Max wins the race. Lewis number two. Lewis like out of context, it would have been terribly, terribly boring. And I'll be honest, I've been guilty of that in the past when it comes to a motorsport event. Like, do I even want to watch this event? Let me look at qualifying. Does it match up with the race classification? Yes, I'm out. And in this case, you know what? This could have been a deceiving or misleading trait for this race, but it was absolutely fantastic. And I think one of the bigger considerations here was, and it's been made pretty clear that most of the teams in the paddock were pretty adamant going into Sunday that they were planning on a one-stop strategy. Nobody going into this race weekend were planning on a two-stop strategy. And one of the things that I think was played down a little bit during the course of the race week or the race week and race itself was the fact that it rained pretty heavily on Saturday night. So on Thursday, on Friday, on Saturday, when you start getting those cars out, there was a ton of rubber laid down on that track. And when there's a ton of rubber laid down on the track, the grip might not be great, but tire degradation is better. On Saturday night, it pours with rain. It washes all that grip away. So suddenly, the track that they were racing on Friday, Saturday was very, very different than the track that they were racing on Sunday. And when now that rubber's washed off the track, all of a sudden, the contact patch of the tires on the car is making contact with the pavement, with the pebbles, with the stone, with the tar. And the degradation on Sunday was dramatically worse than I think any of the teams were expecting. So all these teams have been running simulator models and modeling out a race that would have seen them kind of execute a one-stop strategy, and all of a sudden that's not necessarily going to be what's necessary to finish this race. Red Bull, I think, and you know what? It was a big risk for them, right? It was a risk for Mercedes to run a one stop. It was a risk for Red Bull to run a two stop. And ultimately, because of the circumstances of the race, because Max didn't put a foot wrong, and you know what? You can criticize him for that first corner mistake. And you know what? Hamilton made a mistake on the 52nd lap as well when he made a little bit of contact with that curb. But ultimately, Max ran a fantastic race. Lewis ran a fantastic race. But the differentiator in the end was that pit stop. It was the undercut. It was the fact that they were willing to take the risk on the two stop, but ultimately it made for an exceptionally entertaining race. And I think what was also exciting too is it wasn't just exciting at the top. There was a lot of other really compelling storylines, and you touched on it. Aston Martin getting a double points finish, and I was also extremely happy for Lance Stroll. This is a guy that ultimately finished 20th from the pit lane, 2 weeks after an incredibly tough crash and impact at Baku.
Yeah.
He recovered psychologically. They recovered the car. He put in a great, but fantastic race weekend, fantastic Sunday.
Yeah, I touched on it very briefly about what happened to Lance in qualifying, and it was just one of those frustrating moments. And I mean, I know we're homers when it comes to the North American drivers, and rightfully so. But I mean, just talk about a frustrating Q1 for Lance. He goes out, his first lap is time deleted because he exceeds the track limits in turn 6, which they'd been warned about after practice on Friday. So, there's still plenty of opportunity, plenty of time for him to go back out, set a fast time, and get through to Q2, which you would expect that at the bare minimum, Aston Martin should be expected to make it into Q2. They obviously want to get further than that, but he goes out for a second flying lap, hits a ton of traffic, and then backs off halfway down the Mistral Straight at the back of the track. And then he figures, okay, well, I'll just bring it back around, and I'm going to go and give it one more. I'll have enough time to go and put in one lap as time basically expires when I cross start finish. Poor old Mick Schumacher has a bit of an incident, puts his car into the wall, and then that's it. Red flag. They cancel the session, and Lance right at the very back, save for Yuki Tsunoda, who put his car into the tire wall right, I think right at the very start of the session, and that also brought out the red flags for a little bit too. So tough start to the weekend for Lance, but great recovery, and then also his teammate Sebastian Vettel, and also getting points in P9. So that's obviously a long way off where we would like them to see. I mean, both you and I were really looking forward to seeing what this team could do, and they've had a very difficult half dozen races to start the season until Baku a couple of weeks ago. But I think this is one that they're going to take and they should feel good about this one. The other one I thought that was a great result was obviously the double points finish for McLaren. They, to start the race for the longest time, they were kind of hovering there, sort of right in about the points cut off there, and fighting with the Ferraris, who looked semi decent. Actually, I thought the first stint there, but faded as the race went on. But the one takeaway that I had from the race itself for the final classification, I mean, looking at Lando in P5, Ricardo in P6, a little bit further back off of his teammate, but I was very encouraged what I saw from Danny Ricardo this afternoon. He looked a lot more like the Danny Ricardo that I've been expecting to see for a while, and at least today we saw some evidence of that. I mean, he had a great start, outbraked a couple of his competitors going into that first corner. That's sort of his reputation, the last of the late breakers, and certainly he picked up a couple of points there. So it was great to see him looking pretty racy. It took him about 4 or 5 laps to make that maneuver and pass Fernando going into the chicane on the Mistral Straight there. But a very racy, very positive looking weekend for McLaren, especially for Ricardo, and I think he'll feel good about that for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'll just quickly touch on the Aston Martin situation as well. So we talked a little bit about Lance. Again, another points finish for Sebastian Vettel, and I think if any of the Aston Martin drivers had really struggled before Baku, it was certainly Sebastian Vettel. I think one of the really nice things to see is he seems to be re-engaging with the sport of Formula One, whether it's the media. He's trading helmets with other drivers. He did a helmet swap with Fernando Alonso this weekend, which was really cool. And the other cool thing that I think a lot of the German fans are probably really excited about is he's spending a lot of time pulling Mick Schumacher aside. They were caught on camera looking in Mick's car this weekend, talking about setup, talking about strategy, and I just think that's a good news story for Aston Martin. I think it's also a good news story for Formula One, because it's good if a 4 times world champion is engaged with the sport. But in terms of the McLaren piece, I think it was a really good drive by Daniel Ricciardo today, and I don't want to get too excited, but I think he looked very, very good, and I loved his radio message as well. He seemed excitable. He seemed happy. He was pumped up. You could see it in his media interviews. You could hear it on the radio. You could see it in his social media posts after the race. He seems to be at a much, much, much better place now. And naturally, I think if you look at the races he's putting together, it's not just that he's finishing in the points, but if you want to use Lando Norris as a benchmark in terms of how he's improving race over race over race, he's getting closer and closer in the sectors. His lap times are very, very close, and they're not quite at parity yet, but you have every reason to think that maybe by the time we get to the summer break, there's going to be a couple races where he's going to be pipping his teammate Lando Norris, probably in qualifying, but also in the race, which is really good to see. But the other thing too, and this is really exciting, is for McLaren fans, they've leapt ahead of Ferrari in the championship standings, which I know you'll probably get to a little bit early or a little bit later, but they now sit at 110 points to Ferrari's 94. And I think maybe being a little bit generous about Ferrari this weekend. My perspective is you're right, not a terrible start, but ultimately, whatever the engineers and the mechanics had decided to do in terms of a suspension setup on those cars, it did not work. They were having major graining and degradation issues on the front tires of both of their cars. Their pace was terrible as a result. They had absolutely no speed coming into the corners. They are having to brake super early because they knew they weren't going to have the stopping power. To me, it was a bad weekend overall for Ferrari. And if not for the fact that maybe this track had so much runoff area, they could have had an even more challenging weekend because some of their mistakes weren't penalized in the way it would be in a tighter configuration. But for McLaren, great weekend. They're firmly in third place in the championships. And for Aston Martin, bit by bit by bit, it seems like they're starting to link multiple strong performances together. And I think the risk or the concern coming out of Baku was, again, that's an unusual race. It's unpredictable. Sometimes you see surprise podiums. Were they going to roll that over into a better weekend or a successful weekend? And even though they only pick up 3 points, I still think it was a good weekend for Aston Martin.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, before we go into our first break here, Mark, just had a reply here from Andrew Whitaker in Twitter, just regarding the first round of pit stops. I thought that Max had a 2.3. I thought Lewis was a 2.5. He was saying that it's the other way around. Do you remember exactly what the pit stops were? I know that I agree with what Andrew's saying is that Max had a really great outlap, which really made the difference. But I know I was thinking before after Max's lap or his pit stop was okay. It's not the 1.93 or whatever that ridiculous pit stop time was that he set or Red Bull gave him a couple of races ago. But maybe I did have that mixed up, but certainly it was it was kind of funny just watching Max come down start finish, and it looked so close, and then you see Lewis, because I mean it is very slow with the reduced pit limit or pit lane speed limit in
80
there.
kilometers an hour, baby.
Yeah, just you could almost you could just watch the seconds tick away as they get to that white line where they're allowed to accelerate, and by that time, just that couple of tenths really made a difference. Anyways, I'll let you look that one up. We're going to take a quick break here, and then when we come back, we're going to be talking about that and more. So don't go away. We'll be right back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. Mark and Mark here, recapping all the action on the track at Circuit Paul Ricard this afternoon. And boy, was it ever an exciting race. Well, especially if you're a Max Verstappen and Red Bull fan. I mean, what a great result for Red Bull. Again, Max winning the race, Sergio P3. Max also picking up the fastest lap award. I couldn't help but think that Mercedes, and of course, they have done an amazing job dominating the sport, for the past several, almost, a full-on decade now. But I couldn't help but thinking at one point that we all know that the Mercedes car is made to run out front. It performs better in the clean air, which they all do. But I couldn't help but thinking maybe this team is. Maybe they're also programmed to be running out at leading the race, maybe 1, 2, or in the top couple of slots, any rate. And I couldn't help but think at one point that apart from that one, say, two-thirds of a season back in 2018 when Ferrari were pretty strong and winning some races there, that they really haven't been pushed this hard. I mean, I know that Sebastian was leading the championship. It was kind of going back and forth. It just feels different this time around with Max and Red Bull, and I guess maybe as well because you have a pretty strong combination now with Sergio Perez. They're leading the constructors championship at this point in the season. I don't know if it's just my perspective, but it feels different than the Ferrari challenge a couple of years ago. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with
Yeah,
that or not?
yeah, I really do. And let's put this race aside. I think we're starting to see some things that we haven't seen in the turbo hybrid era. This is and this is really important. And I was pretty shocked to hear this, but the Verstappen pole on Saturday was only the eighth Red Bull pole of the V6 turbo hybrid era. This is also the first time that Red Bull has now run off three consecutive victories in the
Hmm.
V6 turbo hybrid era. And importantly, not only have they run off the triple header, they're now effectively going back to home court. They're going to Austria at a Red Bull owned track in front of Red Bull fans for back to back events. So the next two race weekends are in Austria. Like it feels like things are coming together. And I think you're absolutely Mercedes strategy, their modeling, their simulations, everything historically has probably been built around this concept of leading from the front. And all of a sudden, all the simulations, all the modeling, all the work that they've done over the course of the last 6 years is far more problematic because that's not where they're running earlier in the race as well, and I can't recall if it was Crofty or somebody else, but they made a note as well that, hey, Mercedes looks good. That advantage that Red Bull has historically had this year because of the funny business with the wing, the funny business with the tire pressure, that field has been completely level set by the FIA. But ultimately, even if they did make a change to tire pressure for that increased grip in the corners, even if they did make a change to the wing, which would have compromised their speed in the straights, it didn't
Hmm.
seem to make much of a difference, to be totally honest. And I think Mercedes was handed a bit of a gift early on. One, because Max went wide in that corner for the reason that you described earlier. Two, because he didn't hit one of the ballers. And I think probably the most impressive piece of that Max Verstappen recovery wasn't the fact that he recovered to second, but the fact that he didn't hit a baller. Because if he hit a baller, his entire race could have been compromised. But
Yeah.
ultimately, the Mercedes were handed a gift early and they couldn't close. And partly it was due to the strategy. But I'm really, really, really curious to hear your thoughts on the strategy because I think this is what everyone's talking about online. Last weekend it was the tires, this weekend it was the strategy. But I want to level set once again that coming into Sunday, nobody, not a single team in the paddock was talking about a two-stop strategy. And as a result, it was a risky move for Red Bull. It wasn't a no-brainer. It was a risk for them just as much as it was a risk for Mercedes to stay on a one-stop strategy. Where this entire situation really became inflamed ultimately was, of course, the fact that Bottas lost the podium, Hamilton lost the win, but furthermore, it was that radio message from Bottas that you alluded to
Yes.
right off the top
Yeah.
that has everybody talking, not just about the strategy, which complicated and potentially lost them two podium finishes or one podium finishes and a race win, but ultimately what this is going to do to that Bottas relationship. Because we've talked about it, the contact with Toto's boy, Russell, early on, the fact that there was the fiasco in Monaco, and now there's a situation where Bottas was, by all accounts, extremely clear to the team that based on his interpretation of how the tires were performing, they needed to go two-stop. They didn't, and he felt it was necessary to go on the radio in front of an international TV audience and put that team on blast.
Yeah, well, I mean, dropping F bombs all over the place. But I mean, Lewis was saying, I mean, they gave him the option after Max pitted, but Lewis was saying that he didn't see that there would be like an advantage because Max was so fast in the straights. He was already so far ahead. And he felt his only option was that he should stay out and try and manage the tires and hope that he could make his tires last and manage that gap. Unfortunately, Valtteri's tires were degrading so long he wasn't able to run that interference and really kind of hold Max up. I mean, it was inevitable at some point that Max was going to pass Bottas and make a run at Lewis, but when it came down to it, again, it was that chicane on the Mistral Straight on the back of the circuit where we saw a number of passes throughout the afternoon, all up and down the grid, and Bottas just out braking himself a little bit too much, going too deep into the corner, and really did not offer too much, no, barely any resistance to Max whatsoever. I mean, they came out of that chicane basically side by side. Max just, had the benefit of being on the inside. By the time they got to the next corner, he was just ahead. Bottas is out on the marbles. But, like you said, I mean, it was the way that he put the team on blast, and rightfully so. I mean, he said, I told you we needed to go to plan B. We needed to go to two stops. And look, come on. I mean, we've talked about it before that he's obviously not the guy to be the long-term solution to Mercedes. But come on. I mean, the guy has been with the team. He's been in that car for
Oh,
5 seasons
totally.
now. He's won a bunch of races. He's helped you win a ton of championships. He's one of two people that's in that car in real time, giving you feedback and saying, the best option right now is to go for two pit stops and make that second stop. And they didn't. And quite rightfully, he was furious. I was furious. I'm 100% behind what Valtteri Bottas said. He was right to do so. And if there's any criticism coming from a Mercedes about, I don't know if there is or not, but if they criticize him even behind closed doors, I'd be like, you know what, guys, look at yourselves. You guys made the wrong call. I think Bottas absolutely justified because they gave away a ton of points today, and they did not need to have that happen.
So it's funny you bring that up. I saw a story shortly before we came on, and I'm trying to validate this, but there's a quote from Toto indicating the reason they were forced into the strategy they went to is because Bottas had a lockup on the third lap, which Bottas were flattened out his tires, and they had to bring him in, which would have compromised their dual stop strategy for Bottas. And when I saw that, I'm just like, and again, I haven't verified the authenticity of this article, which you need to do with all the clickbait out there. But I'm just like, if Toto did that, if he said that and he tried to imply or implicate Bottas in the decision making around the strategy, that's total BS. And I remember as well, like I don't fault Bottas for I don't think he let Verstappen by, but I feel like the state of his tires were such at that point. They were so compromised. It was going to happen inevitably. If he could have kept them off an extra 200 yards, 3 corners, 5 corners, half a lap, whatever, it wasn't going to make a difference. Verstappen
Mm-hmm.
finished 5 seconds ahead of Hamilton. It was ultimately inevitable. And I remember as well, there was that comment, and I don't know if you picked up on this, but during the race, they played some radio, and it was Hamilton asking the team, like, is Verstappen going to get me? And they said, and I quote, copy Lewis, it all depends on how easy it is for him to get through Valtteri. And I just, that comment as well, if I'm a Bottas fan, and I'm not, but that comment just implies that Bottas is incapable of holding him back. And again, even the tone of that message, it all depends on how easy it is for him to get through Valtteri, seemed a little disrespectful ultimately. And the other consideration too is this: look, again, based on the condition of Valtteri's tires, he wasn't going to score a podium. Sergio put in a great race and got by him. Bottas had a fantastic race until this point. What I can't understand is why Mercedes didn't bring him in at the very end, change his tires, and at least let him chase fastest lap. At least give him that, and they chose not to. And I cannot
Yeah.
understand that for the life of me.
Yeah, actually that story that you're talking about, I just as you were talking, I did just look it up. It's on motorsport.com, which I would say is one of the more reputable and more
Absolutely.
accurate sites out there. I mean, you can pretty much take whatever they say to the bank. Anyways, my takeaway on this is similar to the whole Monaco debacle where they shredded the wheel nuts, and then afterwards they said, well, Toto was saying, well, Valtteri wasn't on his marks 100%, in the days after the
By
race,
10
and
to 15
Bottas.
millimeters.
Yeah, like
Jeez.
that much. Come on. And my initial take was this is something similar. I mean, okay, if he had a bit of a flat spot, he did, but come on. I mean, where it really came down to the end is, yeah, okay, sure. The undercut worked for Red Bull. Max had a great outlap. He was able to just pip Lewis to first place, which he probably shouldn't have given up in the first place. But hey, racing, that things happen. And Max, like you so nicely pointed out, I mean, he was able to save the car, didn't hit the bollards or split the bollards, and then get a like a 5-second penalty or whatever it would have been had he not rejoined the track properly. But what it really came down to is Red Bull, and I've always thought that their tactics are on point. I mean, this is going back for a number of years. This is also the team that's a master of the double stack. They've done this numerous times. But where this race really turned on it is the fact that they decided to go for that second stop with Max. It was risky, but it paid off. And then Mercedes, I mean, they had such a small, narrow window to react to that and bring Lewis back in and make a second stop themselves. And why they sort of hummed and hawed about it, or just did not address it, that window of opportunity closed, and then all of a sudden they found themselves in the situation that, hey, you know what, it's we know, or we think that maybe two stops is the way to go, but it's too late. We just have to make do with what we have and hope that that Max, we know that he's going to be quick while those tires in this are in the sweet spot, but how quick is he going to drop off on the pace? And if so, is that going to happen? When's he going to hit the wall and kind of, well, not literally hit the wall, but when is the performance of those tires going to drop off? And that advantage that he has reeling Lewis Hamilton, how soon before the end of the race is that going to occur? And as it played out in the end, I mean, it was very close to the end of the race. By the time he actually caught Lewis, was only what, lap and a half from the end, or maybe even less than that. But it it was really fascinating because one of the things I thought was interesting was initially when the undercut worked for Verstappen and Red Bull was Bono on the radio saying, sorry about that, Lewis. They basically beat us to it.
Don't know what
And
happened.
yeah,
Yeah.
we don't know what happened because we all know at this point how famous it is. It's always expected whenever something like that happens, you're going to hear Lewis on the radio at some point after that. Guys, what's going on? We're losing the race here, guys. How's this happening? We have to be better. Whatever it might be. So it was interesting, and of course, we don't know what else came over the radio first. I mean, just the way that the context that's presented in the race broadcast is that came first, or that was the only the only radio broadcast. Who knows what Lewis said? But I thought it was a little bit interesting. But I mean, props to Red Bull. I mean, that was a really gutsy call, and it really they pulled it off by the skin of their teeth. And really, where it turned on it was the fact that that Bottas was just not able to hold him off because his tires were shot. Right?
And this is where that criticism of F1 being all about the cars tends to fall a little bit flat, right? Strategy makes a big chunk of the intrigue and excitement of Formula One. And again, I think one of the things that's really interesting here is everything we're talking about kind of goes back to what we talked about on Thursday, in the sense that the sport mandates one stop every race. They mandate two tire compounds. They develop tires that are intentionally designed to degrade, to promote strategy and to promote intrigue and create excitement. And all of that played out this weekend. I think the frustrating piece for me, though, is, and I'm kind of speaking because obviously I'm a Lewis fan, although ultimately I'll be happy. I'll be thrilled with a Max championship. I'd be thrilled with a Lando championship. I think what's frustrating for me is the math was very, very easy. When that undercut happened, all you had to do was pull out a calculator and just assume if Max picks up 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds per lap on Hamilton, he is going to catch him by lap 50 by 51, 52. And it wasn't a super, 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 I would say, generous calculation that got him catching Hamilton. It was pretty
Mhm.
simple math. And I think what's really important for everyone that's listening at home is you see the pit wall at the track, and you know you've got the team principal and a couple of their engineers there, and they're talking about strategy. All of the strategy is actually being downloaded to them from mission control at the factories. Every team has a mission control center at their factory. They have a dozen, 15, 20 analysts there, and all they're doing is running models full time. If Sergio comes in at this time and he goes onto these tires, when will he catch us? If Sergio comes in at this time, if Max comes in at this time, they're playing out every situation constantly. So the second that Max came in on went onto that compound, Mercedes should have known exactly how to react, and they to. The math was there. So either they didn't trust the advice that was coming to them from Mission Control and Brackley, which is where their factory is, or they got the wrong advice, or they didn't get any advice. And this is where
Mhm.
I'm really struggling. It was a risk for Red Bull to take the dual stop strategy. I just don't understand why Mercedes didn't react. They had enough. They didn't have a ton of time, but they had enough time that they could have reacted, and they chose not to. And then I
Yeah.
think for me, the other frustrating point too is Bottas was running an exceptional race. You didn't listen to his feedback, and it may have been feedback that other drivers were giving as well, but you didn't listen to his feedback. Why not bring him in, put him on fresh tires, and at least give him the opportunity to go after that extra point? He wasn't ever going to finish lower than fourth. Give him the chance to go after that point, because by you taking that point, you're taking it away from Verstappen, and that point could be key when it comes to deciding the
Mhm.
drivers or the constructors championship.
Yeah, it really is. It was really the worst result that Mercedes could have wanted on the weekend, even though that they had Lewis in P2. Anyways, I got some thoughts on that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to answer that. So don't
Cool.
go away. We're going to be back in just a moment. Okay, well, welcome back to the show. And yeah, Mark, just like you were saying before the break there, yeah, I mean, Valtteri, he had a ton of space between him
Yeah, he
and I
did.
guess it would have been what Lando was.
Yeah,
Yeah, it would
Lando.
have been Lando. I mean, he had what 30, 40 seconds. I mean, barring an absolute catastrophe of a pit stop, there was no way that that Lando was going to close that. I mean, yeah, I mean, bring him in, let him get that fastest lap, at least try and salvage something. But I mean, you look now at the gap that they have in both championships. I mean, Max is what 12 points up on Lewis. I mean, it's not a huge gap, but it's starting to get significant, right? And it really is fascinating now because we're going to the Red Bull Ring, like you said a little bit earlier, for a couple of races. And like you say, it is a Red Bull owned track. It's basically their home base. They're going to have all their fans there, or whatever percentage they're allowed. But if you look at last year, I mean, both those two races, the Austrian and the Styrian Grand Prix, which is basically one A and one B, two-part race, whatever you want to call it. Both those races were won by Mercedes. First, the first race was the first one wet, or was the second one? Anyways, but the year before that, Mercedes didn't have a great race, and Max did. So last year was a little bit weird because it was the first two races in the pandemic, and we had that enforced layoff. Because remember last year, Red Bull, they kind of came out of the well, they didn't kind of, they came out of the gate very sluggish, and it really took them a number of races before they were really up to speed. And that was on the back of Christian Horner saying at the time that, oh, we're the most prepared ever that we've been coming into a season, pandemic notwithstanding, and all that. And it really took them a good number of races to find their mojo. And it was always the same. It was always the two Mercedes, Max 5, 6, 7 seconds behind, and then every else behind them. But this year, it's a completely different scenario, and they're going into this race now. You got to think that they're going to be feeling pretty good about where they're at right now, especially if you kind of maybe take. Well, I think obviously you have to look at last year, but I think maybe you're looking at those two races, the opening rounds of 2020 and everything else going on around it, re-pandemic and factory shutdowns and drivers out of the car for months and months and months and all that sort of stuff, that maybe those are outliers. Take what you learned from it from last year, but maybe that's not your best indication, because that probably wasn't Red Bull's best weekends out of the entire season last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I'm probably, and I apologize to everyone. I was getting a little bit emotional, but I was super invested in this race. All that said, I just want to reiterate before I kind of break into the next point that F1 is supposed to be fun. It's an escape. This weekend was a hell of a lot of fun. It was a fantastic
Yeah.
race. We're excited. We're talking about strategy. We're talking about drivers. We're talking about overtakes and undercuts. This is what F1's about. And this is why I'm so excited. But it's okay to get passionate and it's okay to be excitable. And I just think that's kind of where we are. And I think the worst thing would be if we didn't have these kind of things to talk about. I think if I'm going to have one final point on the Mercedes strategy piece is this seems to be a recurring issue this year. And it's the kind of thing that can start to sow discord within a team.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's some big question marks around this team. What's Hamilton's new deal going to look like? Is Valtteri coming back? Is Russell going to replace him? And then on top of that, you've got all of these really questionable strategy decisions. You had strategy questions in Monaco and Baku, and you had strategy questions here. And then it just seems to happen that every weekend where there's a Mercedes issue or strategic miscue, it just seems to translate one way or the other into a Red Bull win. And that's just how tight the championship is because ultimately there's really only two teams competing. If Mercedes makes a mistake, it's unlikely that's going to be Ferrari that scoops in and takes up those points. It's unlikely that McLaren's going to step in and scoop up those points. And Red Bull is just on such great form right now in terms of reliability and
Hmm.
pace and teamwork and strategy. And I know I'm going to be totally put on blast by our listeners for being so pro Red Bull here, but it's hard to discount the complete package that they're bringing to the race weekend every single year, and every single mistake that Mercedes makes is being caught and it's being inflamed and it's being exaggerated. And in prior years, maybe that wasn't the case, and maybe you could have recovered from some of these mistakes and still won a race or took a couple of podiums. But this year, there's absolutely no margin for error. They have no margin for error this year, unlike any other year during the turbo hybrid era, ultimately. But I'm excited to see what Austria is going to look like. I think, to your point, you've summed it up pretty well, but I just feel like they have an awful lot of momentum going into back-to-back weekends at their home track, and nobody knows this track better than the Red Bull factory teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking as you were talking about some of the strategy issues and things like that with Mercedes, is just going back to 2018, for example, when it was Vettel and Hamilton, fighting it out for the championship in that first half of the season. Was it seemed whenever there was a strategy error or something on the call on the pit wall that didn't work out, it was always on the Ferrari side. It just
Yes,
seemed that
yes,
that's
yes.
yeah. And for Mercedes, it was like every call that they made was the right one. And then you come into a couple of years later, and then I don't know what it is, but it seems to be that Sahir is one that really sticks out. That disastrous double stack and getting the wrong tires on the
Oh,
wrong
that's
car,
such a
and
great point.
it seems to me that those are controllable things. I mean, when it comes down to things like cost caps and budgets and things like that, and smaller workforces, okay, that's one thing. But it seems very strange that when it comes to things like the decisions, the strategy, the calls in the garage or in the pit wall, that seems it just doesn't compute. Like I can understand maybe the team not having like the being able to spend the way to victory like they have done since 2014, but that's one thing. This whole separate strategy stuff and the pit wall stuff, that just it's not computing for me. I'm just not able to get my mind around that and where the issue is there.
You're absolutely right. You make such a great point in the sense that you can spend all the money in the world on your team, but if you have a mechanic that strips a nut on the wheel, none of that matters. And you could have the biggest factory and the most mechanics and the biggest marketing team and the biggest marketing budget, but if you make a bad call on race day when it comes to a single stop versus a two-stop strategy, none of that money that's being spent matters. And you're absolutely right. It feels like for sure we saw mistakes in 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. We did, but the distance, the delta between Mercedes and every other team was so great that it didn't seem to really matter. But to your point, we saw a few flashes in 2019, and you're right, towards the back half of last year we start to see them become a little bit more impactful. And that example that you share in Sahir, I think that still resonates with most fans because I think so many of us were cheering for George Russell to
Mhm.
chase those points, to chase that podium, and ultimately a team mistake and inexcusable mistake cost him that podium, potentially cost him that win. But it just seems like those mistakes have rolled over to this year. And to your point, they're all, yeah, I'm going to say it. They feel self inflicted. And I can only
Mhm.
imagine how frustrated the drivers are. I can only imagine how frustrated Bottas is. Look at Bottas's year now. We said this off the top. Monaco. You know what? That's terrible. Obviously, the impact in Imola with George Russell. And I think that's a little bit personal. I think if it was
Mhm.
any other driver for Bottas, it wouldn't be so personal. But think about it. The guy that collected him and took him off and destroyed his race and stole all those points is the guy that's being teed up as his replacement and
That's
also
Toto's boy,
managing.
right?
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, Toto is George Russell's manager, but he's also Valtteri's boss. It's a really odd dynamic. So I think this is one of those situations where maybe you're starting to see a little bit of discord sowed within the team. And when I saw those comments that we spoke to a couple minutes ago from Toto about the fact that, hey, look, ultimately we were forced into the strategy decision that we made because Valtteri flat bottomed his tires on lap 3. I'm like, geez, dude, even if that's true, don't say it. Say it in the driver briefing. Don't say it out loud. Like, the F1 Twitter world doesn't need to hear that and to grip onto that.
Yeah, it's and that's the thing that kind of like ticks me off a little bit to considering all the good things, the phenomenal work that Valtteri Bottas has done for that team since 2017. It's just like these breadcrumbs that are being dropped all over the place, left, right, and center by Toto Wolff. That when the announcement, almost it seems it's going to be inevitable now that
Yeah.
that Georgie boy is going to get that second Mercedes seat. It'll be like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. That Bottas guy, he's such a screw up. Look, he ruined his tires in France and cost Lewis the victory and blah blah blah. He ruined that pit stop in Monaco and all these different things. When those are, I think, completely overblown comments, and I'm starting to get ticked off. And like I'm not a huge fan of Bottas. I mean, not that I dislike him, but I mean he's just not one of the drivers I cheer for. But I'm starting to feel I can feel his frustration and
Oh,
it's
me
starting to
too.
tick me off. It's just like he doesn't deserve it. And it seems like all those, all the dominoes are being set up. And at some point, somebody's going to come and knock them all over. And then you're going to see George Russell in that car. So, you
Maybe
know,
the last thing I would add on this one as well is just to be
sure.
clear. I feel the same way as you do about Bottas, but just to be clear, this was unquestionably the best race he's had this year. The
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
race. He's responded to all the criticism. You look at Monaco retirement, Azerbaijan, he was nowhere, absolutely nowhere. And we criticized him like crazy on the show, as I'm sure so many other critics and analysts did, but he was incredibly racy. He was battling in the top three. He was not dramatically off the pace, and he was unlikely to take first or second, but he was very clearly deserving of a podium. And
Mhm.
ultimately, he didn't get a podium because of the Mercedes strategy. And as we heard late in the race, that was a strategy that he simply wasn't aligned with tonight.
Yeah, it just to maybe wrap this one up and put a bow around it is that
Let's do that.
like we were saying just now, the like the budget things, the removal of say the dual axis steering that maybe affected the performance in the car, which we
Great
talked about
call. Great
Leo
call.
last week. That this was a self-inflicted thing. They had the opportunity to make that second stop like Red Bull did. They just decided not to do it. They decided to go against the, at least maybe Lewis. Maybe if Lewis wanted to stay out and chance it on the tires, that's one thing. But I mean, Bottas was basically screaming to go in and do it, and they didn't. And it just really well worked out in the worst possible way for them. Anyways, I want to take one last break here, Mark. And when we come back, I got one question I want to, to talk about. Anyways, before we go to the break here, Huffle Z Puffle in the live chat on YouTube saying, guys, this is the third race in a row that you guys have set me up to expect a boring race because of the track. And this race was uniquely great. Awesome first season to be getting into Formula One. So we've been put on notice here. So, guys, maybe you should stop listening to us when it comes to prediction on races because clearly we're getting it all wrong each and every time.
Or
But
for the greater good of the sport, we just talk
yeah,
down
maybe.
every race. Every race is terrible. Don't even tune in.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's time to ask us for our picks when it comes to betting. Hey, who's going to win
Yeah, yeah.
this weekend? And then, whatever we say, go and
Let's
bet
go
on
the
the other guy
opposite.
instead. Yeah. Anyways, time for a quick break. When we come back in a moment, I'm going to dive into the mailbag. So don't go away. We're going to be right back. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. So, yes, we did, just going back to that comment there in the live chat, Mark, just about maybe the track being boring. And, I was actually quite surprised, at the amount and quality of overtaking that we did see on Sunday. I mean, it was basically all at the same place at that chicane, on the back street there. But it is interesting. We had an email here from Eric Gordon. Says, "Hey, Mark and Mark, fellow Vancouverite here. I'm a returning F1 fan, brought back into the fold by Drive to Survive. Why do circuits like Paul Ricard, which are criticized for being boring, just don't renovate or configure? There are many possible other configurations available. They could also widen the track to encourage more passing, remove some of those long corners. There are no obvious physical limitations like street tracks. So why don't circuits change in response to the critiques?" No, I mean, oh, sorry. P.S. Actually, I like the look of the red and blue runoff areas, which was interesting because as you talked about last show, that those are actually different areas of this sort of like extra grippy paint and asphalt and stuff like that, which are actually intended to slow the cars down. So, I mean, if you get off on that, it could obviously ruin your tires or certainly, not do them very many favors. But he makes a great point that at Paul Ricard, at least, maybe I mean, it is a fairly compact track. It is not very wide. It's not like you see, say, for Silverstone, for example, which is built on an old World War II air base, right? And you see the amount of area that it encapsulates. And like you said a couple of days ago, it literally takes 2 or 2.5 hours to walk around this circuit. I mean, Paul Ricard still obviously a very a long circuit, but it's very tight and compact. But where they don't have, say, the like maybe room to change the radius of a corner or do this and that, they do have all these different areas because I mean it's all basically one giant asphalted area, and there are so many different configurations. And I couldn't help but notice it too when you saw some of the different camera angles throughout the weekend, and you see all these like little corners here and there. And I couldn't help but thinking to myself, okay, yeah, you get that great long back straightaway, the Mistral straight, where they're doing 200 plus miles an hour before they hit that chicane, and that last complex of corners before you get back into start finish. They're kind of cool because you kind of have at least one double apex corner, so it's interesting to see the drivers go through there, but they're not really set up for passing in those corners there. But I mean, so there are other options where they could use some of these other, corners, other parts of the track. And I couldn't help but thinking, looking at the circuit throughout the weekend, there has to be some other combination of corners and parts of the track that would still be conducive to running, a Formula One car through there that would be favorable. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing something out there and kind of hoping something will stick. But that thought after reading Eric's email, it just won't go away. That I mean, we saw a good race with lots of overtaking at times, but I can't help but feeling that maybe they haven't explored the possibilities there as much as they have in other places like Australia, where they have made some modifications. We'll find out whether or not those have worked. But thoughts on that, Mark?
I think this is a great question that Eric asked, and I'll answer it in a couple of ways. I think the first thing is this: if the track was contemplating, or the track owners were contemplating changes to improve the Formula One experience, it's not happening now. After this weekend, I think Formula One has come and said, look, with the current configuration, we can put on a great show. And I don't think that memory is going to go away anytime soon. I think
Yeah.
for track organizers, the principal reason they don't revisit track configuration ultimately is cost. It costs a tremendous amount of money to get a track designer in. It costs a tremendous amount of money to get the engineers in. Modifying a track means downtime, so you're not able to collect revenue from other events while the modifications are being made. You have to go through the whole FIA grade 1 or grade A approval and a kind of validation process once again. And the real challenge for Paul Ricard is this is a heavily used track. And one of the reasons that so many of the runoff areas are concrete is because that appeals to club racers and it
Hmm.
appeals to the lower formulas. If you have runoff areas that are grass or gravel or are a wall, ultimately that's a very expensive track to race at, because if one of your drivers makes a mistake, that mistake usually results in a very expensive repair to the car. So all of the series that have traditionally funded and helped drive this track forward, they depend and they rely on this low cost racing formula, which is these huge, expansive concrete runoff areas. My dream would be you get rid of them, you grass it, you put in sand traps, you do something to kind of give the look and feel of Imola. That's never going to be an option here. Ultimately, this track's bread and butter is the lower formulas, it's club racing. They depend on those concrete runoff areas to keep costs down. I would love to see changes. I don't necessarily see them making significant changes for an event that happens once a year and may not be
Mhm.
here after another couple of years. I think one of the things that we've discovered over the years is that hosting a race can be fleeting, and as fast as you secure a race is as fast as it disappears. And we were in India for about 5 minutes and in Korea for about 5 minutes, and we went to Turkey and we were gone, and then we're back, and then we're gone again. And Paul Ricard's hosted track events in the past, and then all of a sudden another track organizer will put up big hosting fees. So I think sometimes there's a reluctance to invest heavily in new track configurations. The other challenge too is because this track hosts so many other races, does that new track configuration appeal to those other events and those other series? So it's a complicated question, but I think what we discovered this weekend is the current configuration can be exciting if there's more parity. And maybe really the reason our perception of this track as a Formula One kind of arena has been kind of ruined is because of what we've seen out of Mercedes the last couple of years when we have been here, simply because the Mercedes dominance was so strong.
That's true, but you know the we have seen changes at other tracks. I mean, I was just mentioning just now that they have made some changes to the Albert Park track in Melbourne. We'll see that in November and how that works out. I mean, the difference there is, I mean, that track is used once a
Once a
year.
year,
It's
once a year.
it's used just for Formula One, and then the other 364 days of the year, it's part of the public road system there. But I mean, go back a couple of months. Go back to Barcelona. They did change those corners. What was it? Turns 9 and 10. Basically, reset the track to what it used to be. And then look at another circuit. Look at Silverstone. Look at how Silverstone has changed literally over the decades. I mean, the Silverstone that was basically where they started racing after World War II, and then how it's evolved through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. I mean, that track is very, very different now to what it was even 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, with some of the different corners through there as well. So, I mean, it does happen. And sorry, go ahead. You want to jump in there,
No,
Mark?
I was just going to say too that while we're talking about a kind of a drastic reconfiguration of the track, they did do some work on this track for this season. So they
Yep.
did
Okay.
reprofile a couple of the corners. So it was nothing drastic, but it was maybe enough to kind of help create a more compelling product. But you're right, absolutely, there is absolutely examples of tracks that have been reconfigured. I could just as easily list off the ones that I would love to see reworked, obviously Abu Dhabi and Sochi and some of the other tracks. But
Yeah.
Paul Ricard did, and I'm just kind of pulling up some of the data here from the FIA. Circuit when underwent extensive resurfacing and reprofiling as a program in the hope of aiding racing at this year's French Grand Prix. The changes cover 70% of the track's 6 kilometer length and all 15 of the corners except the high-speed right-hander, blah, 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 blah. So it looks like they did, without completely reconfiguring the track, they did reprofile a number of the corners and resurface the surface, which is probably one of the reasons that we saw so much tire degradation this weekend. But it
Mhm.
looks like they are keen on making some smaller changes that wouldn't compromise racing for the other series that call this track home.
Cool. Hey, Mark, we're starting to get down to the last couple of minutes that we have together this evening. Did you have or did you not have something for MotoGP Corner? I know you were texting me today. I wasn't sure when you wanted to to throw this one out there.
Oh, I'm
We
so
got
happy
we
you
we
brought that
got
up.
time.
Do we have the jingle? Can you put in the jingle? Because this whole segment is worth GP signal or jingle.
Well, I don't have the jingo actually ready, but
Okay, I'm
it,
just gonna assume it's playing by the time. So this is
I've
very
got the applause going in the background instead. So
There's
you know,
applause? Okay, I'll take that. So this is super, 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 super exciting. So, like I've talked about on this podcast before, the better part of the last decade in MotoGP has been dominated by a single racer. His name is Marc Marquez. He's a Spanish driver. He entered Formula One in 2013, and he has basically won every championship since then, except for 2015. He has been unstoppable. He didn't win last year because he suffered a major bone break early in the season. His team, the Honda team, decided to bring him back early, basically the next race weekend, aggravated the issue. He was basically gone for a year. He came back this year, and I think a lot of people were skeptical. One, what's the bike going to look like? So he's riding a factory Honda bike. What is the bike going to look like? How is he recovered? Is he going to have the psychological wherewithal to sustain a complete MotoGP season? His first couple of races this year were okay. He scored a seventh in Portugal. He was in the points in Spain. He had three consecutive retirements in France, Italy, and Catalonia. He goes into the German Grand Prix this weekend and he wins. He comes from behind. He puts in an exceptional performance and he won. And I shouldn't be excited about this. This is a guy who won the title in 2013 and 14 and 16 and 17 and 18 and 19. He's won a ton of Grand Prix, but it was exciting because this is a guy that has really been the backbone as a marketing machine and really as that transcendent star that the sport needs as Valentino Rossi's career starts to fade away. But it was great to see him back today, taking a win. Hopefully, he'll be able to continue this momentum in the back half of the MotoGP calendar. But it was excellent to see Marc Marquez winning a race and taking Team Honda to glory. So I was very, very, very excited to see that. But that is MotoGP Corner for today.
Awesome. And I did get confirmation from Andrew at the end there that it was Lewis's first stop was a 2.20, Max was a 2.32 second at the beginning, or their first pit stop. So yeah, I don't know where I got the 2.5 from, but it was a great
Make
outlap
mistakes.
by my yeah. No, it's all good. It was interesting because I just I came out of those pit stops thinking, Red Bull did it again. It wasn't like a world record, but it was just enough. But yeah, it is just one of those stark reminders again, just like how important tenths of seconds are in Formula One, and how it really came down at the end of the day to making a big difference. Anyways, that's awesome. That's all I've got for tonight. I mean, you've got one more thing.
I got a couple of other quick things I want to.
Okay, go for it.
I'll be quick because I know we want to get off here. The IndyCar race this weekend, Road America. 5 of the drivers in the top 10, including, and I think everyone will know these names: Romain Grosjean, Marcus Ericsson, Alexander Rossi, Takuma Sato. 5 racers in the top 10 at Road America today are previous Formula One drivers. So that's
Cool.
kind of cool to see. And just a couple of other stats from this race weekend, because a couple of our listeners brought this up. All 20 of the cars finished the race today. So all 20 of the cars that were on the opening lap, the opening formation, the formation lap, they started on the grid. Well, I guess there's a few drivers that started from pit lane, but all of the cars tonight that finished or started the race finished the race. This is also only the 10th time this has ever happened in the history of Formula One. So just understand that this is very, very rare. What's really cool about that, though, is it's the 6th time that has happened in the V6 Turbo Hybrid era. So it's only happened 10 times in the 1,000+ Grand Prix that have been raced, but it's the 6th time this has happened since 2014, which really speaks to the increased
Hmm.
reliability of the cars that we're seeing. So we talk about them being super complex, hybrid this, hybrid that, wing that, DRS that, bloobity blably bloop, all this kind of technical jargon. The cars have never been more reliable for the drivers. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, just a couple of points that I wanted to share because I thought they were kind of interesting. And like we said last week, it was really cool to see that Romain Grosjean's enjoying some success in Indy. Marcus Ericsson is enjoying some success in Indy. And of course, we are going to see Kevin Magnussen. He made his debut in Indy today. Wasn't a great debut, but I'm sure we'll see him in the top 10 soon as well.
That's awesome. It's cool to see some of these former Formula One drivers having success elsewhere. One disappointing thing for Grosjean was this was supposed to be the weekend that he was going to get that test of the
Oh,
Mercedes
that's
at
such a
Paul
great call.
Ricard. Yeah, I mean it didn't work out. I sure hope that they honor it. I'm sure that they will. I mean, otherwise that accident at Sakir last year will be his last time in a Formula One car. And I mean, I don't doubt Toto's integrity or his intentions. I think that once things work out, and I think it was basically down to like the whole travel and quarantine self-isolation thing. It was something like that. It seems to me it was like pandemic related. So I sure hope that it works out, that Romain is able to get into that Mercedes and get that test. And I think it would just it would be a nice ending to that story for him for sure.
I totally agree. And you and I talked about this so much when that race weekend happened. We talked about the fact that I just hope, and I think we both agreed, like, I just hope that's not his last experience in a Formula One car is
Yeah.
climbing out of that Haas when it's on fire. Let him let him have a really great final memory in a Formula One car. And I think it's really great that he's gone on to have some success over in Indy as well. It is kind of unique to Formula One, this kind of story, right? Which is,
Yep.
he scored some podiums early in his career. He was a good racer. Unfortunately, at the end, he was paired with a really underfunded and poor team. But it's kind of like, if you translate this over to Major League Sports, this would be taking somebody like Charles Barkley, who never won an NBA championship, and as he was retiring, said, "Hey, you know what? Go enjoy the Chicago Bulls for a practice. Go and run with the Bulls." Like, it's really peculiar and really unique to F1. But I thought it was a really great gesture by Toto and the Mercedes team to say, "Hey, come on over, put in a couple laps in our car to get a sense of what it could have been like." But yeah, very very cool story, and I was really sad to see. But hopefully we'll see that happen before the end of the season.
Yeah, I hope so. Hey, well, Mark, that's all I got for tonight, other than to remind everybody to grab your lederhosen, grab your Bierstein, get ready for some Oompa music. We're going to Austria figuratively for a couple of weeks. So looking forward to that. We'll be
Next
back
two
in the
weeks, baby.
next 2 weeks.
Triple
Yeah, so
header.
it should be great. Ever been to Austria?
No, I'm
Oh,
sure you have, which is where the
I
story's
have.
going. Is it
Yeah,
good?
no. Oh, it's a beautiful country. It's an awesome country. I went there for a ski vacation a number of years ago. Want to go back one of these days. I mean, I only scratched the surface in a week. Love to go to Vienna and a lot of these other beautiful places in Austria. So, if you're going to actually be there, or if you're in Austria right now, I'm very, very jealous. But on that note, we will sign
One more
off.
shout out.
One
One
more
more
shout
shout
out.
out.
Okay, go for it.
You're gonna kill me. Thank you to everyone for all your Twitter support. It's been fantastic. If you don't follow us on Twitter, please do. I think we're building a fantastic community. We're
Yep.
regularly doing spaces chats. And finally, and I never, ever, ever, ever ask for help. If you enjoyed this show, do us one big solid. If you can give us a review on iTunes or whatever your podcast platform is of choice, give us a 4-star review, a 5-star review, whatever you think is fair. We super, super, super appreciate it. And we cannot thank you enough for all of your support, and hope to see you on Twitter
Absolutely.
soon. Thank you so much. I'm turning off my mic so you can end this podcast.
Well, I'm going to go and have some Tyroler speck. So, I'm clearly thinking with my stomach now. And on that note, time to get off the air. Thanks, guys. Have a great week. We'll be back on
Bye, guys.
Thursday. Take care, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.